The soft chime of the doorbell echoed through the pristine boutique as Melania Trump stepped inside. Dressed in a simple yet elegant coat, her presence was graceful but unassuming. The boutique was one of the most exclusive in the city, where only the wealthiest customers shopped for the latest in high fashion. Shelves were lined with designer handbags, silk scarves, and tailored coats worth thousands of dollars. The scent of expensive leather and delicate perfume lingered in the air, a silent reminder that this was not just any store. It was a place of luxury, status, and exclusivity. Melania took a slow breath, allowing herself to absorb the ambiance. She was no stranger to such places, yet today she had chosen to keep a low profile. No security detail, no flashing cameras, just her, quietly exploring the collection. As she reached out to examine a sleek black handbag, a sharp voice interrupted her thoughts. "Excuse me, ma'am." The store manager's voice rang out, laced with an unmistakable edge of condescension. Melania turned slightly, meeting the eyes of a tall, impeccably dressed man in his late 40s. His name tag read, Christopher, Boutique Manager. His polished shoes gleamed under the store's bright lights, and his carefully styled hair was a testament to his meticulous nature. But his expression? It was the very definition of judgmental. "Can I help you?" he asked, though his tone suggested the opposite. Melania, ever the picture of composure, gave him a polite nod. "Just looking, thank you." Christopher's eyes flicked over her, scanning her outfit. Subtle, sophisticated, yet lacking the flashy designer logos he was used to seeing on their elite clientele. He assumed she was just another tourist, someone who had wandered in, hoping to get a glimpse of luxury, without any real intention to buy. He folded his arms. "Well, I just want to let you know," he said slowly, as if speaking to someone who needed instructions. "These items are from our premium collection. They're not for casual browsing." There was an unmistakable smirk in his voice, the kind that suggested he had already sized her up and deemed her unworthy of being there. Melania raised an eyebrow slightly, but she didn't react. She simply turned her attention back to the handbag, running her fingers lightly over the fine leather. Christopher sighed audibly. "That one," he said, pointing at the handbag in her hands, "is a limited edition piece. Hand-stitched Italian leather. Only 3 of them exist in the entire country. It costs..." He paused, emphasizing the words. $38,000. A moment of silence. Melania didn't even flinch. Instead, she simply nodded. "Beautiful craftsmanship," she remarked softly. Christopher let out a small chuckle, shaking his head. "Yes, well, craftsmanship comes at a price." His smirk widened. "Perhaps our accessories section might be more suitable? We have some lovely silk scarves that are more accessible." The message was clear. This wasn't just about the price tag, it was about who he believed was worthy of luxury. In his mind, Melania was not one of those people. The few other employees in the store seemed uncomfortable. A younger sales associate standing nearby recognized Melania almost instantly, but before she could speak up, Christopher shot her a look that silenced her. He was in charge here, and he'd already made up his mind about this ordinary woman. Melania, however, remained composed. She placed the handbag back on the shelf with delicate precision and turned to face him fully. "Thank you for your time," she said, her voice calm, elegant, and void of any emotion. "I appreciate the recommendation." With that, she gave him a polite nod and gracefully turned toward the exit. Christopher, feeling triumphant, crossed his arms and smirked as she walked away. He had seen this before, people coming in, pretending to belong, only to leave empty-handed. He was proud of himself for maintaining the store's exclusivity. As the boutique's glass doors swung shut behind her, he chuckled to himself and muttered under his breath, "Some people really don't know their place." What he didn't know was that he had just made one of the biggest mistakes of his career. And very soon, he would regret it. The boutique buzzed with an air of exclusivity. Every detail, from the soft golden lighting to the marble floors, was designed to exude luxury. The shelves were adorned with designer handbags, silk scarves, and limited edition couture pieces that only the wealthiest clientele could afford. It was a place where people didn't ask for prices. If you had to ask, you didn't belong. Melania Trump moved through the store with quiet elegance. She wasn't one for ostentatious displays of wealth, preferring timeless sophistication over loud designer logos. Today, she had chosen a simple yet refined outfit: an understated cashmere coat, tailored slacks, and classic heels. While others in the store were dripping in recognizable brands, she blended in effortlessly, drawing no immediate attention to herself. But in the eyes of the boutique manager, Christopher, that was a problem. From the moment Melania entered, Christopher had been watching her. With his years of experience managing elite clientele, he had developed a habit of sizing people up within seconds. The true billionaires, the elite socialites, the celebrities, they all had a certain aura about them. To him, Melania didn't fit that mold. She didn't flaunt wealth the way he expected, and so in his mind she wasn't a priority. Instead of welcoming her, he turned his attention to two women near the counter, clearly regulars, dressed in extravagant fur coats, dripping in jewelry, chatting about their latest vacation in the Maldives. With a bright, almost exaggerated smile, Christopher approached them, completely ignoring Melania. "Ladies, welcome back. We just received a new shipment from Milan. I set aside a few pieces that I knew you'd love." His voice was warm, inviting, filled with charm. Melania continued browsing, unbothered by the lack of greeting. She reached out to examine a beautiful structured handbag, a classic black leather piece with gold embellishments. Just as her fingers brushed the handle, Christopher's voice cut through the air, sharp and condescending. "Ah, ma'am, perhaps I can direct you to our more accessible collections." She turned, raising an eyebrow slightly. Christopher forced a tight-lipped smile. "That particular bag is from our limited edition collection. Only a few exist worldwide. It's priced at..." He paused for effect. $38,000. His tone carried a smug certainty, as if he expected her to react with shock, perhaps even embarrassment. Melania simply nodded, running her fingers along the fine stitching. "Beautiful craftsmanship," she remarked softly. Christopher exhaled impatiently. He had seen this before: tourists, daydreamers, women who wandered in just to touch luxury but had no real intention of buying. In his mind, she was wasting his time. "Yes, well," he said, folding his arms, "that level of craftsmanship comes at a price." There was a lingering smirk in his voice, the kind that suggested he had already judged her. Still, Melania didn't react. She placed the bag back gently and moved toward the jewelry display. Christopher, however, wasn't done. As she reached for a delicate bracelet, he stepped in front of her, blocking her view. "These pieces are part of our private collection," he said, voice dripping with forced politeness. "Appointments are usually required." Melania glanced at him, her expression unreadable. Nearby, a younger sales associate shifted awkwardly. She had recognized Melania instantly, but Christopher's authority kept her silent. A few feet away, another customer entered, a tall man in a designer suit, exuding an air of wealth. Within seconds, Christopher's demeanor changed entirely. "Ah, Mr. Reynolds," he greeted the man enthusiastically, extending his hand. "So good to see you again. Let me show you our latest arrivals." Without another glance at Melania, Christopher swept away, leaving her standing by the jewelry case as if she were invisible. A quiet tension settled in the air. Other employees exchanged uneasy glances, but no one dared to intervene. Melania remained still for a moment. She had encountered arrogance before, but this level of blatant disrespect was something else. She took a slow breath, straightened her posture, and turned toward the exit. As she walked past Christopher, who was now laughing with the wealthy customer, she met his eyes briefly. "Thank you for your time," she said, her voice calm, composed, and unreadable. Christopher barely acknowledged her. He simply nodded, already forgetting her presence. As she exited the boutique, the glass doors closing behind her, He chuckled to himself and muttered under his breath, "Some people really don't know their place." What he didn't know was that his biggest mistake had just been made, and very soon he would regret it. Melania stood still for a moment, her expression unreadable. The weight of the boutique manager's arrogance hung in the air, but she showed no reaction. There was no flicker of anger, no sharp retort, only a composed, quiet confidence. She adjusted the sleeve of her coat, glanced at the jewelry display one last time, then turned toward the exit. The boutique's luxurious atmosphere seemed to close in around her, but she moved with effortless grace, unaffected by the humiliating treatment she had just received. As she walked past Christopher, who was now fully engaged in conversation with his wealthy client, she met his gaze briefly. He barely looked at her, dismissing her as just another nobody who had wandered in above her means. But then Melania did something that caught him off guard. She offered him a polite smile. Not the forced apologetic kind one gives when embarrassed, but a poised and knowing smile, one that suggested she was entirely unshaken by the situation. "Thank you for your hospitality," she said smoothly, her voice calm, measured, and filled with a hint of amusement. Christopher barely glanced at her. With a smirk, he gave a curt nod, already turning his attention back to the wealthy customer. Melania walked to the boutique's glass doors, her heels clicking softly against the polished marble floor. As she stepped outside, the cold air greeted her, crisp and refreshing, as if washing away the air of arrogance she had just left behind. Inside, Christopher chuckled to himself. "Some people just don't know their place," he muttered under his breath, shaking his head. The other employees exchanged uneasy glances. They had recognized her the moment she walked in. They had watched as their manager made a fool of himself, assuming she was someone insignificant. But none of them dared to speak up. Christopher, however, remained blissfully unaware. To him, he had successfully kept an unworthy customer from wasting his time. He considered it a victory. What he didn't realize was that his actions had just set something much bigger in motion. Because Melania Trump wasn't just another customer, and soon he would come to regret the way he had treated her. Would you like me to move on to the realization when he learns who she is? A few hours later, the quiet hum of the boutique was suddenly interrupted by the sight of sleek, black luxury cars pulling up in front of the store. The tinted windows reflected the city lights, and the boutique staff exchanged puzzled glances. Something important was happening. The glass doors swung open, and Melania Trump stepped inside once again. But this time, she was not alone. A small team followed behind her, 2 well-dressed security personnel, a personal assistant, and a woman carrying a discreet notepad. Their mere presence exuded an air of importance, making it impossible for anyone in the store to ignore them. The employees, who had witnessed the earlier interaction, suddenly straightened up. Their casual expressions turned into ones of nervous anticipation. They knew now, beyond any doubt, that their manager had made a grave mistake. Christopher, who had been in the middle of assisting another high-end client, turned at the sound of the door. His confident smirk faded the instant his eyes met Melania's. His face drained of color, his posture stiffening as realization dawned upon him. Melania's presence was completely different this time. Gone was the quiet woman he had dismissed earlier. Now she carried herself with an undeniable authority, her calm expression making the tension in the room even more palpable. Christopher quickly glanced at his employees, hoping for some explanation. But the fearful looks on their faces told him all he needed to know. He had made an irreversible mistake. Swallowing hard, he hurriedly approached, his arrogant demeanor now replaced with forced politeness. "Mrs. Trump, I hadn't realized," he stammered, his voice lacking the confidence it had held earlier. Melania tilted her head slightly as if considering his words. "No, you did not," she said smoothly, her voice even and unwavering. Christopher's throat went dry. The other employees stood frozen, unsure of what to do. The boutique, which had once felt like his domain, now felt suffocatingly small under her gaze. Her assistant stepped forward, handing Melania a sleek black folder. She opened it slowly, taking a moment before looking back up at Christopher. "It's a shame," she continued. "Exclusivity should never mean arrogance." Christopher felt the weight of her words sink in, and for the first time in his career, he was speechless. "Would you like me to continue with the lesson, his public humiliation?" The moment hung heavy in the air. Christopher, the boutique manager, felt the weight of every second as Melania Trump stood before him, her composed yet firm presence making it impossible for him to ignore the mistake he had made. Just hours ago, he had dismissed her as someone unworthy of his attention, someone who, in his eyes, didn't belong in the world of luxury fashion. But now he realized just how deeply he had misjudged her. The silence in the boutique was almost deafening. The employees, who had previously witnessed his arrogance, now looked at him with a mix of curiosity and unease. Some of them had secretly disapproved of the way he had treated Melania earlier, but had been too afraid to speak up. Now they stood motionless, sensing that something significant was about to happen. Melania remained poised, her expression unreadable. She didn't need to raise her voice or show anger. Her presence alone spoke volumes. With slow, deliberate movements, she stepped past Christopher without acknowledging him. Instead, she turned toward a young sales associate, a woman who had quietly observed everything from the sidelines. "Excuse me," Melania said gently, addressing the young woman. "I'd like to see some of your finest collections." The employee's eyes widened slightly in surprise. She had expected Melania to storm out after such an unpleasant experience, not to return with such quiet confidence. After a brief hesitation, she quickly nodded, eager to assist her. "Of course, ma'am. Right this way," she said, leading Melania toward an exclusive section of the boutique where the most expensive designer pieces were displayed. Christopher, still standing near the entrance, clenched his fists at his sides. He wanted to intervene, to take control of the situation, but for the first time he found himself powerless. This was his boutique, his domain, but Melania had effortlessly shifted the entire atmosphere with nothing more than her presence and grace. As Melania browsed the store, she made careful selections, choosing only the most exquisite pieces, luxurious handbags, elegant gowns, and rare jewelry pieces that only the wealthiest clientele could afford. Each item she picked was worth more than the boutique's monthly rent, yet she examined them with quiet, discerning eyes, as if ensuring they were truly worth her investment. Christopher could feel his heart pounding. Every moment that passed was a reminder of his arrogance. He had assumed she wasn't worth his time, yet here she was, making purchases that would significantly boost the boutique's sales for the month. And worst of all, she was doing it without acknowledging him. The final blow came when she turned to the young sales associate and said, "You've been very kind. Please ensure that all these items are packaged beautifully." The young woman nodded enthusiastically. "Of course, ma'am. Would you like them delivered, or will you be taking them with you today?" Melania smiled slightly. "I'll have them delivered, thank you." Christopher's stomach twisted. This should have been his sale. He should have been the one assisting her, earning the credit for one of the biggest transactions of the year. Instead, he stood there, watching helplessly as an employee he had barely noticed before received the recognition and commission he had so arrogantly assumed was his to claim. As Melania prepared to leave, she finally turned to face Christopher. For a brief moment, he felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps she would forgive him, or at the very least offer him a chance to redeem himself. But her next words shattered any illusions he had. "Exclusivity should never mean arrogance," she said, her voice calm but firm. "True luxury is not just about the price tag. It's about the experience, the respect, and the way people are treated." Her words landed with a weight heavier than any public humiliation Christopher had ever experienced. He had spent years priding himself on his knowledge of high-end fashion and luxury branding, yet in just a few sentences, Melania had exposed the flaw in his approach. She gave him one last glance before turning away, walking toward the exit with the same elegance she had carried throughout the entire encounter. Her security team followed behind, their presence making it clear that this was not just an ordinary customer. This was a woman of influence, someone who commanded respect without needing to demand it. As the boutique doors swung shut behind her, the employees slowly turned toward Christopher. Some of them exchanged knowing looks, while others avoided his gaze entirely. No one dared to say a word, but the message was clear. He had made a mistake, and everyone had witnessed it. Christopher stood frozen, his face burning with embarrassment. He had always believed that power came from exclusivity, from making people feel as though they had to prove their worth to enter his world. But today, he had learned the hard way that real power came from grace, confidence, and the ability to command respect without cruelty. And the regret he felt in that moment was something he would never forget. The boutique had never been this quiet. Even though it was still open, there were no customers inside. The usual soft hum of conversations, the delicate clinking of hangers, and the subtle scent of expensive perfume were now overshadowed by an uncomfortable stillness. Christopher, the boutique manager, stood behind the counter, staring blankly at the entrance where Melania Trump had just walked out. He could still hear her last words echoing in his mind. Exclusivity should never mean arrogance. For someone who had spent years cultivating an image of prestige and high-class service, those words felt like a direct attack on everything he had believed. He had built his career on the idea that not everyone deserved luxury, that exclusivity was meant for the select few. But today, he had learned a hard lesson. Real class was not about wealth, power, or fashion. It was about grace, respect, and the way people were treated. It didn't take long for the incident to reach social media. The young sales associate who had witnessed the entire event had shared her experience. With a friend. That friend posted it online, and within hours, the story went viral. The headline was everywhere. People dissected every detail, from the way Christopher had dismissed Melania to the moment she returned and made one of the biggest purchases in the store's history, all while ignoring him completely. Comments flooded in from all over the world. This is exactly why you should never judge someone by their appearance. Melania handled it with such grace. That manager just lost the biggest sale of his life. He deserves it. Arrogance will always lead to downfall. I hope this boutique learns its lesson. The boutique's official social media pages were bombarded with criticism. People demanded an apology, some even calling for Christopher to be fired. Others shared their own experiences of being mistreated by high-end stores simply because they didn't look wealthy. It wasn't just social media that picked up the story. News outlets ran articles, talk shows discussed it, and influencers chimed in with their opinions. Some debated whether luxury brands had a responsibility to be more inclusive. Others saw it as a wake-up call about how society often equates wealth with respect. A decline in business. As the controversy grew, the boutique began to feel the impact. Regular customers who once prided themselves on shopping there hesitated to return. They didn't want to be associated with a place that had become a symbol of elitism gone wrong. Sales started to decline. Foot traffic slowed. Even the wealthiest clients, who typically had no interest in social media debates, took notice. Some of them quietly canceled their appointments, while others expressed their disappointment through private emails to the boutique's owners. It wasn't long before Christopher's superiors got involved. A formal meeting was scheduled, and for the first time in years, he felt genuinely nervous. He had always been untouchable in the company, praised for his ability to maintain the store's exclusivity. But now, he was a liability. The day of the meeting arrived. Christopher sat stiffly in a sleek, modern conference room, facing 3 senior executives. Their expressions were unreadable, but the tension in the air was clear. One of them, a woman in her 50s with a reputation for being brutally honest, wasted no time. "Do you have any idea how much damage this has done to our brand?" she asked, sliding a printed report across the table. Christopher hesitated before picking it up. It was a collection of news articles, social media comments, and financial projections showing the boutique's recent decline. "We've had high-profile incidents before," another executive added. "But this one is different. It's not just about one bad interaction. This has turned into a conversation about how luxury brands treat people, and right now, we are on the wrong side of that conversation." Christopher swallowed hard. He had never imagined that a single moment of arrogance could lead to something this severe. "We need to do damage control," the first executive continued, "starting with you." He stiffened. "What do you mean?" "Effective immediately, you're being placed on an indefinite leave," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "We're also issuing a public apology, and we expect you to take full responsibility for your actions." The words hit him like a punch to the gut. He wanted to argue, to explain that it wasn't fair, that he had simply been doing what he had always done. But deep down, he knew that no excuse could justify what had happened. With no other choice, Christopher nodded. His once flawless career was now hanging by a thread, and for the first time in years he felt powerless. As the weeks passed, Christopher had plenty of time to reflect. He watched as the boutique scrambled to repair its image. The store implemented new customer service training, emphasizing kindness and respect over exclusivity. They even launched a campaign about luxury with grace, a direct attempt to undo the damage caused by his actions. And while the boutique slowly regained its footing, Christopher struggled to find his own. The industry that once welcomed him with open arms now saw him as a cautionary tale. Other luxury brands hesitated to hire him, fearing the backlash that might come with his name. He had spent years believing that power came from making others feel unworthy. But now he realized that true power, real influence, came from treating people with dignity, regardless of their status. One day, as he walked past the boutique he once managed, he noticed something new. A sign on the window read, "Luxury is about experience, not exclusion. Everyone deserves respect." It was a direct contradiction to everything he had once believed, and yet he couldn't deny the truth in it. With a deep sigh, Christopher turned and walked away, knowing that he would never make the same mistake again.